Back on April the 10th, I did the Dharma talk at the Muddy Waters Zen Temple in Royal Oak, Michigan, and through an unfortunate microphone incident, it didn't get recorded. So I decided to try to do a little reproduction here. It's never quite the same as it is when you have people in the room and it feels a little more lively, but I thought there might be some folks who might find some benefit. So I'm going to go through the Dharma talk that I did that day. I'm actually going to start with a reading from the Buddhist scriptures, from the Upajjhatana Sutta, from the Pali Canon. Subjects for contemplation. There are these 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. Which 5? I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. This is the first fact that one should reflect on often. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. This is the second fact that one should reflect on often. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. This is the third fact that one should reflect on often. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. This is the fourth fact that one should reflect on often. I am the owner of actions, heir to actions, born of actions, related through actions, and have actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. This is the fifth fact that one should reflect on often. These are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging? There are beings who are intoxicated with the typical use intoxication with youth. Because of that intoxication with youth, they conduct themselves in a bad way in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that youth's intoxication with youth will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness? There are beings who are intoxicated with a typical healthy person's intoxication with health. Because of that intoxication with health, they conduct themselves in a bad way in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that healthy person's intoxication with health will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death? There are beings who are intoxicated with a typical living person's intoxication with life. Because of that intoxication with life, they conduct themselves in a bad way in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that living person's intoxication with life will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me? There are beings who feel desire and passion for the things they find dear and appealing. Because of that passion, they conduct themselves in a bad way, in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that desire and passion for the things they find dear and appealing will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one reflect that I am the owner of actions, heir to actions, born of actions, related through actions, and have actions as my arbitrator? Whatever I do for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir? There are beings who conduct themselves in a bad way in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that bad conduct in body, speech, and mind will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this: I am not the only one subject to aging, who has not gone beyond aging. To the extent that there are beings, past and future, passing away and re-arising, all beings are subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. When she often reflects on this, the factors of the path take birth. She sticks with that path, develops it, cultivates it. And she sticks with that path, develops it, and cultivates it. As she sticks with that path, develops it, and cultivates it, the fetters are abandoned, the obsessions destroyed. Further, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this: I am not the only one subject to illness who has not gone beyond illness. I am not the only one subject to death who has not gone beyond death. I am not the only one who will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. A disciple of the Noble Ones considers this: I am not the only one who is owner of actions, heir to actions, born of actions, related through actions, and have actions as my arbitrator, who, whatever I do for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. To the extent that there are beings, past and future, passing away and re-arising, all beings are the owners of actions, heir to actions, born of actions, related through actions, and have actions as their arbitrator. Whatever they do for good or for evil, to that will they fall heir. When she often reflects on this, the factors of the path take birth. She sticks with that path, develops it, cultivates it. As she sticks with that path, develops it, and cultivates it, The fetters are abandoned, the obsessions destroyed. Subject to birth, subject to aging, subject to death, run-of-the-mill people are repelled by those who suffer from that to which they are subject. And if I were to be repelled by being subject to these things, it would not be fitting for me, living as they do. As I maintained this attitude, knowing the Dhamma without acquisitions, I overcame all intoxication with health, youth, and life, as one who sees renunciation as rest. For me, energy arose, unbinding was clearly seen. There's now no way I could partake of sensual pleasures. Having followed the holy life, I will not return. These are the words of the Buddha, as recorded by our tradition. May they be a blessing to you. What I want to talk about here was inspired primarily by something I heard on the radio, filtered through something that one of the other clergy at Muddy Water, Bummi Sunim, talked about in a Dharma talk he did a month or so ago now. It also builds a little bit on something that another clergy member, Reverend Bubja, said in her Dharma talk at the beginning of April. I was listening to National Public Radio a few weeks ago, and they did a segment on end-of-life care, specifically on death doulas. Now, if you're not familiar with the profession of a doula, the word doula originally referred to a kind of a paraprofessional whose job it is to help coach a woman through childbirth. They provide physical and emotional support. They don't do medical care. It's not like being a midwife. End-of-life or death doulas, in a similar way, are trained to support a person emotionally and spiritually through the transition from life to death. This can also include aspects like helping them with estate planning, wills, wishes for funerals, those sorts of things. One of the doulas who was interviewed in the segment on the radio was a woman named Alua Arthur, who was originally educated as a lawyer and is now the head of an organization called Going with Grace that provides training for death doulas. At one point in the interview, Miss Arthur used a really interesting expression. She used the phrase existential gaslighting. Now, the minute I heard that term, I immediately thought, now that's got to be the title of a Dharma talk at some point. I got to do a Dharma talk about this thing. So as soon as I got home, I started trying to research this phrase. I couldn't find any documentation of it anywhere. I couldn't find any place else that anyone had used it. I don't know if it's something I just couldn't find, or maybe it's something that she came up with, maybe even kind of spontaneously in the moment without really planning to. Now, what Ms. Arthur was referring to as existential gaslighting is the tendency that family, friends, and even medical professionals may have to push a person who has a life-threatening or potentially terminal condition toward a kind of pathological positivity. Oh, no, don't worry about dying, just be optimistic. No, you don't need to plan just in case. You're going to get better. Don't dwell on the negative. You'll just get depressed. Making a will, talking about final arrangements, that's just catastrophic thinking. Just think positively, everything will be fine. The consequence of this quite often is that the patient continues to worry because they can't prepare for what might come to pass, and by the time it becomes clear to everyone around them that they really are dying, there isn't enough time left to prepare for it sufficiently emotionally, spiritually, even legally and financially. Now, gaslighting, the term gaslighting is a term that's been around for a while. It originally actually comes from a play from back in 1938. Most people actually know the movie that was made based on the play in 1944. It started to be used a lot more in recent years for a variety of complicated reasons, more regularly in very recent years, especially things related to our political situation. Anyway, according to Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, gaslighting is psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perceptions of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional and mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. So if you put it more simply, you could say that it refers to making someone doubt their own perception and understanding of reality. So you can see how what Ms. Arthur described would definitely qualify as gaslighting. The ill person is told, don't believe your thoughts about morality. Your anxiety is not legitimate. Why would people say this to someone who's sick? For family and friends, part of it probably is motivated by their own anxieties. This person's important to me. I don't want to lose them. And if they start talking about the possibility of death, then it makes it too real, and I just can't handle that. For medical professionals, it's probably in part driven by a kind of a false bravado. If my patient acknowledges the possibility of death, then they're expressing a lack of confidence in my ability to heal them, and that's a threat to my ego, and I'm not going to put up with that. When I started thinking about this idea of existential gaslighting, I realized that it's a much larger and more subtle phenomenon, not something that only happens to patients with severe illness. Human cultures in general are inclined to the denial of the undeniable and encourage people to hide from and kind of numb themselves to the inevitability of the mortal condition rather than to face it, work through its implications. There are several online cartoonists I look at, check what they've done almost every day, every morning. And a few weeks ago, one of them had an image. It was just a person in a lab coat. And the kind of little word bubble next to the person said, "I'm a doctor and my diagnosis is that you're going to die. Also, everyone else is going to die." The text I read earlier, the scripture I started with, the Upajjhatana Sutta, is from the Pali Canon's Anguttara Nikaya. That's the collection, it's what's translated that way, the further factored discourses. And the reason they're called that is because it's a big, thick book, the sections of which are based on scriptures that are formed around lists of different numbers. So there's the book of ones and the book of twos and the book of threes, and obviously this one comes from the book of fives. 279 different sutras that are all based on lists of 5 things, because there's nothing an oral tradition loves more than a list that makes it easier to remember things. The beginning of the text, the first part, has been turned into an often repeated piece of liturgy in worship, and something that people are encouraged to practicing to meditate upon. I first learned it in the version as translated by Thich Nhat Hanh, the very well-known Vietnamese Buddhist teacher who died just very recently. And this was his version of the text in English. "I'm of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I'm of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I'm of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand." Now, in the talk that he gave back in March, Bobby Sunim, again one of my fellow clergy members at Muddy Waters Zen Temple in Michigan, referred to a concept called samvega, which describes the emotional reaction a person feels when they realize the meaninglessness of living an ordinary life, and the powerful motivation that those emotions inspire to find another way, of living. He quoted from an essay by a Buddhist teacher and scholar named Tanasaru Bhikkhu. I want to read from the same essay a little further down than the passage that he used. This is from the same text. "But more than providing a useful term by which he means this idea of samvega, Buddhism also offers an effective strategy for dealing with the feelings behind it, feelings that modern culture finds threatening and handles very poorly. Ours, of course, is not the only culture threatened by feelings of samvega. In the Siddhartha story, the story of the historical Buddha, the father's reaction to the young prince's discovery stands for the way most cultures try to deal with these feelings. He tried to convince the prince that his standards for happiness were impossibly high, at the same time trying to distract him with relationships and every sensual pleasure imaginable. Not only did he arrange an ideal marriage for the prince, but he also built him a palace for every season of the year, bought him only the best clothes and toiletries, sponsored a constant round of entertainments, and kept the servants well paid so that they could put at least a semblance of joy into the job of satisfying the prince's every whim. To put it simply, the father's strategy was to get the prince to lower his aims and to find satisfaction in a happiness that was less than absolute and far from pure. If the young prince were alive today, the father would have other tools for dealing with the prince's dissatisfaction, including psychotherapy, mindfulness retreats, and religious counseling. But the basic strategy would be the same: to distract the prince and dull his sensitivity so that he could settle down to become a well-adjusted, productive member of society. In other words, the Buddha's father was engaging in existential gaslighting, trying to convince his son that his perception of reality was wrong and that he had misconstrued what he saw as the illness at the heart of the human condition. Our society does the same thing to us when it tries to convince us that the most important contribution we make to the world is to be good consumers and contribute to the economy and the gross domestic product, or that we should base our self-worth and an illusion of immortality on the number of trophies that we've earned, or how many Employee of the Month awards we've received, or how many publications are on our CV. I'm an academic, sorry, that one's just for me. The Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges said, "We forget that we are all dead men conversing with dead men." Now, if you excuse the obvious sexism of that statement, overlooking that part, part of why we forget that fact is that society wants us to forget and shushes us when we say anything about it. It would not be inaccurate to say that the core mission of the Buddha Dharma is the resistance of existential gaslighting. You could paraphrase what tradition records as the Buddha's second sermon, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, as saying in part, don't believe your culture when it tries to convince you that anything is permanent. That's just existential gaslighting. Your body is impermanent. Your mind and all of its products are impermanent. Everything you see and everyone you know are also impermanent, unstable, and not to be counted on. He was appearing in Tricycle magazine. The scholar and teacher Andrew Olinsky wrote this about this notion of samvega. When a lion roars in the forest, all the animals tremble and scurry to their places of refuge. This is not the fear of a helpless victim, but a fear that stirs them to action for their own safety. In the same way, when a Buddha roars out the truth of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, those who are wise are moved by the profound sense of spiritual urgency. So when you feel that spiritual urgency, trust it. When you hear the Buddha's lion roar, heed it. And when the culture around you tries to convince you that you're wrong or crazy for thinking and feeling this way, that the Buddha's roar is a figment of your imagination, and wouldn't it be easier to just be a good citizen and go to the mall? Resist that existential gaslighting and hold fast to the Dharma. Sangbol Ha Shipshio. May you and all beings manifest enlightenment.